trying to pat myself on the back, but in that space, I learned some lessons and I wrote them down. And then I decided to give them away.
All right. Welcome to the You Are Lawyer podcast. David Sclar, how are you today?
I'm great. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course, of course. So you and we connected. You found me, you found the podcast. You were saying that you listened to a couple of episodes as well. And this podcast is different because it's all about humanizing lawyers, right? Like we all went to the same 3 years. We probably all took the same bar exam, but like now what makes us different? And I actually am a YouTuber. One of my first videos was soft skills for lawyers because people don't talk about lawyer soft skills, right? They talk about you're a shark, you're this, you're that, you know what I mean? And I was like, well, no, you have to know how to talk to the partner. You have to know how to negotiate. You have to know how to like let somebody think it's their idea, let it be your idea. All of those things are soft skills, but you've actually written a book about it. So tell the audience all about you and the name of your book.
Sure. Yeah. Well, hold up the book right away. It's called Workplace Strategies for Technology Lawyers, which is a mouthful, and we'll come back to that, but it's actually very specific. And it's workplace strategies, which is what you said. It's soft skills. And, you know, I wrote it for tech lawyers in part because I feel like that was the kind of experience that I had. I had worked at a startup. I've now worked at a few different types of tech companies and startups. And it felt like being an in-house lawyer, a modern in-house lawyer, was sort of intertwined with working at a tech-forward company. And I think when things are moving as fast as they do at a tech company, the workplace strategies, the tips that I have in the book, and the soft skills are that much more important to navigate the chaos. Yeah. You asked about me. I can get back to that, but yes.
So David, when I hear technology, I think AI because it's 2025. But in truth, I remember hearing stories about lawyers who were scared of email. Why would you ever want to send something online that you could just walk over to them, right? And so why is it different? Why are the soft skills different for lawyers in technology?
What I think of when I talk about technology is being a lawyer that's doing more than just reviewing a contract. You know, being a lawyer who is participatory, intertwined with the product team that's building the next tool, or the marketing team, engineering, like all the different departments. You're one of them in how you practice. If you're working at a tech company, that's what I'm thinking of, is sort of a forward-leaning lawyer. And then, yes, also understanding those technologies that you're working with. You know, when the engineering team brings the latest thing that they want to implement to me, I can't review the contract or give them legal advice without really understanding it well. And so we're sort of teaching each other, where they teach me about the tech and I teach them about how the law thinks about it.
Yeah. Okay. So as a lawyer, I know that most of the things that we do are very intentional. The title of your book, Workplace Strategies for Technology Lawyers. You could probably write another one for lawyers who are working in a law firm, right? This one is specific for in-house or startup type lawyers.
Well, I'm glad you asked. So I wrote this book over 4 years ago. It was the beginning of COVID. And at the time, there was nothing like it. Nobody was talking about soft skills of lawyers or really anything other than, if there was a book about law, it was going to be about how to do contracts or how to litigate, something like that. So I had, and by the way, it's a collection of tips, right? Like the first tip in the book is solutions, not issue spotting, right? So it's like nobody was writing a book saying, you know, that's what you should, you know, tips on that. And so it's really not limited to tech lawyers or startups. It really should be called Workplace Strategies for In-House Lawyers, or How to Be an In-House Lawyer. But even that is actually kind of limiting, because what I've found is that there's an audience for these ideas at law firms, because outside counsel want to have a better relationship with their in-house clients, and they want to understand how those in-house lawyers are thinking, and so how they can feel like more of one of the team. And so I really think, you know, associates at law firms should be reading this so that they do more than just turn a memo or an email, but like actually understand the client on the other side and give better actionable advice. And then the other thing is law students, who are just thinking about legal careers, whether it's wanting to go in-house someday or like being at a law firm and angling your career that way, or being a different type of outside counsel, so that the cycle doesn't continue of just like outside counsel who send 5-page emails with the answer buried somewhere in page 3.
Yes, absolutely. So listening to you, I think that's a really good description, because the podcast audience is about 40% law students and then 60% young lawyers. So like 5 years practicing or less. How would you describe a technology lawyer? I worked in a big law firm, and I worked in their intellectual property department. And I would not have called that tech. But then I was talking to analysts and patent lawyers all day, and it was getting really, really technical. So for anyone listening who's not quite sure, what would you call a technology lawyer?
Well, I mean, it's funny. If you truly are like all tech and really you have that mindset, maybe you were an engineer in college, you probably are going to go more into like IP, right? You might actually, help draft patents and get them or prosecute them or whatever. When I think of tech, it's not so much that. It's people who want to work in and around innovative products. That's what I think about. And, of course, there's innovation everywhere, but obviously, you mentioned AI, like things are moving fast, and when you and it takes a certain mindset, right? It's really almost equivalent to speed, right? You're the kind of lawyer who's getting things done day by day, week by week, hour by hour. You like it's kind of the opposite of like somebody who wants to do an appellate clerkship. It's where you might work on the same opinion for a month or two before it's published. This is like more like a courtroom where you have like 50 cases on the docket that day, and you got to just like speed through them and handle them all. So it takes a certain mindset of like of enjoying that, not feeling overwhelmed. Project management, like how can I transition between things quickly? Those are the kinds of things that work really well for technology.
Okay. Yeah. All right, cool. So you said that the book is a collection of tips. Where did you get the tips from, or how did you keep the record of them to then put together into the book?
So what I did is, as I was going through, I had this really great startup experience. I worked for a company that hadn't yet launched their first product. I was part of the founding legal team. It was the GC and me, and we built everything. And then it kept growing, and it grew, and we ended up with millions of users, and it was it happened like while Silicon Valley was on HBO. And so it was like kind of having a similar experience with all of the same chaos too. And I took notes on what was happening, because there were these wild scenarios and lessons learned. And then when I grew a team, I would teach them, and I'd see through their eyes, like as they were going through it. And sometimes we'd have a conversation about how to fix a situation, and something would come out of my mouth, and I'd go, oh, I didn't even know I was going to say that. I didn't know I had that wisdom, but now I do. And I'm not saying I have all the wisdom in the world. I'm not trying to pat myself on the back, but in that space, I learned some lessons and I wrote them down. And then I decided to give them away. And frankly, I wish more people did this, right? Like I thought about writing a book about myself or my journey, or, nobody cares. And I'm cool with that. That's actually part of being an in-house lawyer too, is kind of letting that ego go and just being a service provider to people. But nobody cared about my story. But I thought, you know what? I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to make this book as efficient as possible in giving people practical, useful information. It's deliberately thin. Like I want them to be able to pick it up, read it in half an hour, and use 3 or 4 tips that they like best for them, like every day for the next year. And I wish there were more resources out there that where people did that. So anyway, I gave it away, and I'm still giving it away.
Yes. So it's soft skills for busy lawyers, in a small book that you can read and keep rereading and pass around and give to friends and all of it. I love that. I asked the question because I am I'm always on LinkedIn. I like social media, period. But on LinkedIn, my posts are very specific, and I like to think that I am cataloging things to eventually put together into a book. So that's why I was wondering. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it helped. It was easier also than writing a full narrative that you have to weave. But one of the things, somebody noticed this, and I was really appreciative, is that they sort of talk to each other, right? They don't live in a vacuum. Each of the tips kind of echo and call back, you know, sort of like you can say that context is really important, which is something I always tell people, right? If someone asks me a question, it makes a big difference who it's coming from. Back to the law firm example, you're an outside counsel. You get a question, the partner sends you a question. I never would have thought when I was a junior lawyer to think, well, who at the client is asking this? Is it coming from the lawyer at the client, the in-house counsel? Is it coming directly from the marketing team? Do we know that person? Have we worked with them before? Do they like us? Are they ornery? I don't know. you know, it changes the kind of feedback, the kind of response that I'm going to give. And so anyway, that's like something, context is really important. And so I illustrate it maybe in a context like that with marketing, and then maybe it comes up in like 5 other tips or maybe 10, it's so important. So yeah, it's easier to write.
Yeah. And I think that makes sense, especially with one of the examples you gave being to be solution oriented, right? Because we've all received those emails where it's like, hey, I need this, but it could be this and this and this and this and this and this. And it's like, why don't you just ask me what it is? Or why don't you ask me how I can help? Or like, but to your point, you'll know this person always sends these 8-paragraph emails. This person is just going to say, this broke, help, right? And so you need to know that context. So.
Yeah, and this person's not going to follow your advice whether you give it to them or not. This one needs to be told 3 times. This one, it helps if you put something in bold up front. This one, you have to go into the actual ticketing system where they do the thing following up from your meeting and make sure that the ticket actually gets done. And also like this one, I would be tempted to talk to their boss, but that's a much bigger deal than I have. I now know that from being in house, and so I think to myself, when to escalate is a really important, and how to escalate. And so I've had people CC my boss when they wrote to me about something I did. And that's an aggressive move. That doesn't feel good for me. And so I'm very conscious about what I do for them. At the end of the day, again, I'm a service provider, so I want to make them look good.
Yeah, understand. Okay, so David, we jumped straight into the book. Let's go back a little bit. Why did you decide to go to law school? Did you know other lawyers when you were growing up?
Yeah, we sure did, and thanks for doing that. I've never talked so much about the book, so I appreciate your interest. But it really is sort of just the launching point for how I think and how I talk about the law. And so, yeah, like I went to law school with no interest in litigating. I met all these people in law school who had just wanted to be in a courtroom, and that was never me. I went to law school because I wanted to solve problems and be a peacemaker and like bring people together. And I think that's it's not entirely unusual. Like there's places for everybody within the law, but I sometimes felt a bit alone in that. I had been at they called it like a think tank, right? It was a nonprofit. My first job after college, it was focused on healthcare. A lot of my career has been in healthcare. It was the kind of nonprofit that takes powerful people and puts them in a room and then asks them, where do you want us to do our research? And the thing that was really cool about this nonprofit is that our CEO sort of treated everybody, these really powerful CEOs who like children, and basically gave them all green stickers and said, you vote on what we do for our research. And that was a really complicated meeting with a lot of big heads, really powerful people in there. And the person who brought it all together, in addition to our CEO with their green stickers, was a lawyer. And that lawyer framed everything for everybody throughout the meeting. Here we are. We've decided on this. We have, one chosen. We have 3 more topics we can choose, and then bringing it home. Like, I heard this person say that. Should we prioritize it? Just always kind of adding cohesion and clarity.
Yeah.
And that's what I wanted to do.
I love that. I think that's a really good description of what great lawyers do, adding clarity and cohesion. I'm thinking about even when I walk out of meetings and I'm kind of summarizing it for myself in my notes, And that kind of is what we do, right? Because you're taking the whole thing and putting it together, follow up on this piece, don't forget that, don't forget this. I worked in operations and I thought that I got that from operations, but operations is solution driven and it is also problem solving. And I didn't know that at the time either. I was just, you told me you had a room full of stuff, you needed it done. I figured it out, right? I thought I just enjoyed processes. And then I looked back later and was like, oh, that was operations, which is project management on a really high level, right? Okay, so you go to law school because you want to be a peacemaker and peacekeeper. So I love that you worked between college and law school. I think that's really important that you didn't go straight through. So what happens next? Did you want an appellate courtship, or did you know you wanted to go work in house, or like what was that part like?
That's kind of the other reason why I like talking about these kind of things and working with people. I love working with exactly your audience, right? Like people in law school, people who are early in their careers, because I had to figure this out. I had to sort of pivot and adapt to where my skill set was and where it wasn't. So like appellate, I went to law school. So I went to Harvard undergrad. I went to Harvard Law, and I was like, you know what? I got a shot. I'm going to be a Supreme Court justice. I'm just going to like crush law school. And I didn't crush law school. I was a fine law student, but I saw other people. They just lived and breathed the law in a way that was incredible, it was admirable. But I had to sort of say, okay, well, that's not for me. And I realized I probably wouldn't enjoy it anyway. And that's just as important, right? It would have been nice for a resume to get an appellate or a Supreme Court clerkship, but I don't think I would have loved it. And so what I did know was that I had a background and an interest in healthcare. I had some sense that I had an interest in business. I wanted to work at a law firm, and I wanted to work in their healthcare group. And so I only looked at law firms that focused on healthcare, that had a healthcare group. And that helped me narrow down among all the different firms.
Yeah. So did you stay in the Cambridge area after law school, or did you move around?
No, so I got a clerkship, but it was in bankruptcy in New York, in Brooklyn. Kind of funny too, because like I ended up getting that clerkship in large part because of my relationship with Professor Elizabeth Warren, now Senator Elizabeth Warren. And these are ridiculous considerations or problems. But when I was like, should I go to Yale? Because Yale has like all these professors that are like, it's smaller and they get you clerkships. But that's actually what ended up happening at Harvard. So I guess, you never know. I love Elizabeth Warren for that. She was amazing as a professor and as a friend in law school. And that can happen even at a big place like Harvard. And so, yeah, I went to Brooklyn and I worked there, and I was going to come back to Boston, but then I worked in New York at a firm for 3 years.
Okay. I love this. I like to get into the details because if you're in law school, you think you can only choose one thing and that's it. And then by the time you get to be like the 5th year associate, you're like, man, I'm stuck. And I'm trying to tell them, no, you're not. There's so many different things you can do. You met that person. Nobody that you met was by accident. Somebody could do this. Somebody could do that. Somebody could do this. Or even just an idea that you have in your mind could spark up later, right? You start working, you end up in Brooklyn, you do all this stuff. Where did you learn your soft skills? Was it just from maneuvering and just being an adult? Or, did you pick up this from Elizabeth Warren? Did you pick up that from a classmate? Like, what happened?
I think that sort of is my personality, right? And I think I was happy that there was a home for me in the law, but I didn't know that at the time. It's funny, people talk about, and my heart goes out even to say, I don't even want to say this out loud because my heart goes out for it, but people talk about what's hard about big law. And for me, it wasn't really the hours or the intensity. Honestly, it was a little bit like the loneliness, because you are maybe not if you're in a remote world, but at least when I was there, you're in your little office and, your day is measured by how much you produce and how many hours you're working. And you may be surrounded by smart, really bright, wonderful, thoughtful colleagues. But if you're talking to them in the break room, or on a walk, then you're not billing. And so you need to get back to that desk. And that was really hard for me, especially because I'm a big believer that like some of the best ideas happen from communicating with other people. And and of course we all know some of the best ideas happen while you're exercising or in the shower or whatever, like those kinds of organic interactions. And I just didn't have enough room for that. And I didn't really know my clients very well because I worked at a really, big firm. I worked at Ropes and Gray. My clients were huge pharma and medical device companies. And I was on some major projects with government investigations where they threw a lot, like an army of associates at it. And that was great, important work, but I wasn't close to somebody who was designing something, building something. And so that put together made me feel like something was missing in the law, and I wasn't sure if I would find it. I only say this because it has a happy ending, but it was a tough time. It was a tough time recognizing that I wasn't going to crush law school and get the appellate clerkship. It was a tough time at the law firm, like not feeling fully fulfilled. Like there have been a lot of moments where it's like, is this the right path or is there a door for me?
Yeah. So you took all the things that you learned and you were like, how can I help the next generation or the lawyers who are a little bit younger than me coming up so that they can maneuver it a little bit easier?
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to do, right now. In fact, I'm trying to sort of share that difficulty. And so one thing I did that was a good move was I ended up communicating with, I found another firm, and what I was specifically I loved Ropes. I loved the people, but I looked at my situation and I saw what was fulfilling and not. And I knew I wanted to be working closely with a mentor. That was the one thing I felt like I was really missing. The mentor I was working with at Ropes was retiring. And so I sat down with a lawyer in another firm at Cooley. I was kind of scared I never thought I would leave Ropes, but I sat down with him and the first thing out of his mouth was, I'm looking for a right-hand man. Can you be that guy? And I knew right away this was my future. And so it was awesome. When you go knocking, things open.
Well, that's why a lot of people don't go knocking, because they're afraid that then something could happen, right? I like to think that lawyers should take more risk because we know how to mitigate the risk. We literally were just trained on how to do that, right? And that's why even the title of this podcast, Take Risk and Change Careers, because if you had not done that one thing to even say, hey, I think I need some mentorship. Okay, I have to find it on my own. That kind of was like your launch pad to where you are now. So it's incredible.
It was incredible. And it did change things because the clientele at Cooley was totally different. It was tech startups, very much more lean. So they was much more client facing. So I got to have some of those interactions. And then sure enough, of course, I ended up going to one of those clients from Cooley, a couple of years later when I was a 7th-year associate. It went in-house to one of our clients, and that was the startup that I helped build. And everything went from there. It's amazing.
Yes. So audience, if you're listening, take the risk, even if it's a baby risk. Your story may not look just like David's, but if you take that small risk, for one, you're telling yourself that your emotions matter and your thoughts matter because you're like, I think I want more. Am I allowed to do that? Yeah, you are, right? And so you take that small risk and then it turns into another one and another one. So
absolutely. And also, if I were talking to me in that time, I would try to identify with, David, what I did enjoy, what I didn't enjoy, and what I was looking for. I found it, but it would have been so much more reassuring to have somebody sort of say, well, okay, you need mentorship. Maybe you need to go to a practice that's very small where the partner needs an associate he's going to rely on day in and day out, as opposed to a practice that has, 20 associates on the team. That would change your career. So if you can find people who will talk it through with you like that, I'm one of them, but there's a lot of them. That really helps.
Yeah. And if you can't get access to David, you will always have access to his book, Workplace Strategies for Technology Lawyers.
Yeah. Well, the thing about the book is it helps you think if you want to go in-house. And if you ever do want to go in-house, my advice is read it before you have an interview. And then you can talk like an in-house lawyer. You'll know what we're looking for. Because I do talk to a lot of people who say they're at a law firm, and we interview people at in-house who are at law firms, and they're great and they're awesome at what they do, but it's really hard to tell if they're fit for what we do day in and day out. And so you want to be able to communicate that you're one of us and you would make a great in-house lawyer.
Because there is a difference. There is a really, really big difference. Even when I was at the IP department, we were working with third-party sellers with Amazon. So this was 7 years ago now. but it's a very specific personality type. And I remember when I started there, and it wasn't until I started building up things, I was like, oh, I fit in here. Because at first I was like, no, it's not going to be and some of the partners, they would tell me, they were like, no, you said this thing in the interview, or you did this thing, or you said you did whatever. And I was like, oh, she's a builder. She's a this, she's a whatever. You were speaking the language and you didn't even know it. Yeah. So I love that. I love that. In-house has its own personality within whatever company you're at too.
Yeah. And it's got like a ton of pros, but it has some cons. And part of that personality test is to see if you can deal with them well, you know? So when somebody basically blames a project on legal that they dropped the ball on, but you know, maybe legal's a better scapegoat. Are you going to like storm out of the room, or are you going to be able to like take a breath and just kind of like handle it and it'll work out? And you know, part of the skill set.
Show the poker face now and then cry about it later.
Oh, hopefully not. Yeah, hopefully not.
Yeah, we're coming up on time, but I always ask every guest, what would you say to young lawyers or law students about what they can do with their law degree?
It's the cheesy thing about you can do anything, but it's not in the way of like, you can save the world, you can change the world. I mean, you can do that too. But my message is you can do anything in the sense that you can figure out what makes you up happy and, you know, getting up in the morning. And there is a place for you in the law. Like there's a lot of different paths. And so you can find that, but it takes some searching, because every path is unique and the world is changing.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, David Sclar, for joining me on the You Are a Lawyer podcast. I appreciate you.
Thank you for doing a podcast like this. I would have loved it when I was a junior lawyer and a law student. So it's wonderful.